Welcome to Norse Code, episode 95, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host, Dusty O'Connell, here with our in-house analyst and Vikings blogger extraordinaire, Arif Hassan. How are you, Arif?
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. Little stuffy this morning. Customarily, we record the show fairly late at night because, I am just kind of a night person by nature, and you are an all-times person in that you don't really sleep. But today we are, due to just various things getting in the way, we are flipping the script and doing the show first thing in the morning. And by first thing in the morning, I mean like 11 o'clock.
Yeah, it's really not our forte, but I assume we'll put together a pretty good show.
I am too tired to even make a Matt Forte joke. That's where we're at right now.
We're in the worst of all possible worlds.
Exactly. This episode, we have got a preview of the Chicago game, heading to Soldier Field to beat our heads against the concrete ground. And then I wanted to get Arif talking about daily fantasy sports, in particular daily fantasy NFL football, although I hear that NBA DFS can be rather lucrative. But our motto here is to DFS today, because tomorrow it might be illegal in your state. And so we'll try to equip you with some knowledge and maybe a pick here or there to inform your daily fantasy sports playing, which is, at least in most states, assuredly not gambling.
Hooray!
Definitely not gambling.
Remember,
but
it's a carve-out, not a loophole.
Exactly. You can't carve out a loophole. Wait, what? Before we get to all that, though, a million thank yous to our dedicated listenership. Norse Code survives pretty much solely on listener donations. And now that we've moved to a 2-episode-a-week format, we have seen our bandwidth costs go up. And initially, as the season was starting, we were not seeing a commensurate increase in donations. And so it got kind of hairy for a second there. But luckily, our dedicated core of listeners has stepped up with open hearts and open wallets, as they always have in the past, to make sure that we can keep the lights on and continue bringing you little fun improvements to the show, like some of the stuff that James has been doing to make each episode sound better. This episode, actually, I would like to thank Chad Stowers of Goodyear, Arizona, who sends us $20 with a note. Thanks for the podcast. I like that. It's very, very straight to the point. And Brace Herbolt of Albuquerque, New Mexico. A lot of listeners from the Southwest this week, it seems like. Also contributing $10 to the cause. $20 to the cause. No note. He is a man of even fewer words. But thank you so much, gentlemen. Your donations alone, those 2 donations alone, will pay for our bandwidth costs for a month with a little bit left over for December. So it doesn't take much to support Norse Code, but every little bit is appreciated and goes right back into the show. So thank you so much for your contributions, and please keep them coming. We really appreciate it. All we ask is that you send us about $3.50.
At least.
Well, I know, and I mentioned this last episode, and then we were showered with even more money after the 3-man pod. Even though we only ask for about $3.50, most people give more, like a lot more. And we really appreciate that. It makes us feel like the digital multimedia content that we produce has value. And also kind of makes us feel like we're lowballing ourselves, which, the merits of that are...
That's good, because then we'll never ask for too much and be rude. Because Minnesotans are very concerned about that.
It's true. It's very important to seem appropriately nice, because no one will ever tell you if you're not, but they will definitely treat you like you're not.
Hooray. There's been a lot of think pieces about that, too, like in the past couple of days, or past couple of weeks, about how Midwestern Minnesota nice and Midwestern the Midwestern inability to communicate thoughts and feelings is both problematic and awesome. A lot of think pieces.
It's really just like taciturn passive aggressiveness.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's some clips from Fargo in there too, which is pretty appropriate. Just not in Minnesota, by the way.
just so you know. But the movie was filmed mostly in Minnesota. And one could argue that the Fargoan accent, as it's known outside the Midwest, is actually the like Prairie Home Companion Minnesota Midwestern accent.
It's like a very like outstate Minnesotan accent, but I will say it's not like I haven't heard it here in the cities. I definitely have.
Oh yeah, you know.
Oh yeah.
A little bit of Vikings news before we dive into the preview. Eric Kendricks was named the Rookie Defensive Player of the Month after he was twice nominated and once won Rookie of the Week, I believe. Am I accurate in thinking that?
You're correct.
Oh, man, I will never get tired of hearing you say that, even though it doesn't happen very often.
Savor it, buddy.
No, I'll take what I can get. According to the article, the little write-up on DailyNorseman.com, host of this fine podcast, Kendricks was named the NFL Defensive Rookie of the Month for October, the first Vikings defensive player to win the honor since Kevin Williams way back in 2003, accumulating 4 sacks and 20 combined tackles over the course of the month, answering any lingering questions that Vikings fans may have had about the Gerald Hodges trade. Not many Gerald Hodges questions in the mailbag this week. It's true.
No, I still think it's a value issue, not a linebacker issue. Moving on.
One last note. Kendricks was able to secure his Rookie of the Month accolades in a short month. The Vikings bye week was in October, and it only took him 3 weeks to make an impression on the appropriate people to win this award. Mike Zimmer, however, is not impressed. Unless you're the Super Bowl MVP, you can screw right off. I mean, Mike Zimmer did say that the only individual award that he particularly cares about is Super Bowl MVP. So
no, I mean that's very Zim.
Aim high. I'm a bigger fan of reaching for the lowest star. That's been
because if you miss, at least you're in orbit. Like what?
Yeah, basically. Well, no, and if the closer I get to it, the more time slows down until I eventually cross its event horizon. So we're playing the Bears this week. Regrettably, we are doing it in Chicago. Vikings have a pretty brutal history at Soldier Field, which is renowned for its remarkably poor quality. Now, what's the I forget exactly the numbers, but I think we're like 1-19 at Soldier Field in the last 20 meetings. And I thought this was interesting. We're 3-14 in our last 15 divisional road games. So is the Soldier Field thing like an indictment purely on Soldier Field, or are the Vikings just like preternaturally terrible at playing divisional road games? Like what is the larger takeaway from these two, I guess, statistics?
I mean, some of it's like bad luck. I think that's the first thing to say. And some of it's just, the Vikings have been in bad years, which isn't to say Chicago hasn't been in bad years. But yeah, I don't know. I think the field plays a role. I think Devin Hester's unusual proclivity against the Vikings plays a role. I think luck plays a role, and I think that the fact that the Vikings have been bad for the majority of those 20 meetings, plays a role. Well, maybe not the majority. Yeah, the majority. It's kind of disappointing, of course, like when you can't win like the 2009 matchup when the Vikings were very good, and you can't win, some of those earlier matchups when the Vikings were also very good. I believe 2004 they didn't win either. That was a pretty good team. But yeah, I don't know. it sucks. It should end. That's all I have. There's not really much to take away from that other than home field advantage clearly played a role, and also the Vikings were not very good for the majority of that stretch.
And those are things that we're, well, not the field thing, but we are hopefully rectifying our suckiness. At least we're coming off of a couple of good weeks. The defense in particular, probably feeling their oats right now, I would say.
Yeah, no, I think the defense is like sort of the marquee or the signature of the team at the moment. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's a defense that's probably good enough to get an average offense into the playoffs at the moment in an average division. In a division with the Green Bay Packers, who knows? I was just talking with Andy about this, where is the defense good enough to overcome some of the issues that come with having to play the Packers and having the Packers in your division? And it's possible that the Packers go grab a couple of losses, and the Vikings grab a couple of wins before their meeting, and that means that they'll be tied, and that's technically the fight for the division right there. But yeah, no, the defense is definitely sort of the marquee unit of the team, and it's making its presence known. I think the rest of the NFL has begun to notice it. You see sort of the Vikings, ranked up high in a lot of power rankings, and a lot of those mentions are a result of the defense.
So without Sharif Floyd, we're pretty much counting on Xavier Rhodes to both excel on defense and continue to lead the team in penalties, right?
Yeah, I think so. Part of the reason Xavier Rhodes can lead the team in penalties is because the rest of the team is so disinclined to commit penalties. The Vikings have the lowest number of penalties in the league. Some of that is because their bye week has already happened, whereas some other teams have not had a bye week. But for the most part, it's because the Vikings are very good at avoiding penalties, and Xavier Rhodes evidently is immune to the magic that made the Vikings very disciplined. I don't know what's going to fix it.
That's a nice way of saying he is not as disciplined as the other members of the defense, right?
Yeah, sure. I think I think that's maybe a different way of putting it, Dusty. But yeah, no, the Xavier Rhodes, hasn't played up to his end of year performance last year, even if you take away the penalties. But he has been playing very well, very well. But I think the focus for him right now is less on matching his performance from last year and more on finding ways to get rid of those penalties again.
Something the Vikings have struggled with historically is finding defenders who can cover the middle. And some this year we've seen the secondary struggle with assignments and being able to effectively cover the entire field, particularly the middle. Chicago's offense is kind of designed, well, maybe not designed, but it is worked out where as they go over the middle, so goes their game. How do you think the Vikings are going to deal with this unfortunate reality? I mean, who do we rely on to prevent Cutler to Jeffrey over and over and over down the middle of the field?
Yeah, well, I think this is going to be another game where you're going to see Rhodes shadow someone, just like he did Calvin Johnson. I know Mike Zimmer doesn't like to do it, but I think that you wouldn't be surprised to see Rhodes shadow Jeffrey throughout the game. You're going to have a combination of Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks deal with Martellus Bennett. You're also going to have a combination of those two deal with Matt Forte. And those are kind of the three weapons that you're primarily concerned about, and those are the three weapons that are actually fairly good at getting open in the middle of the field and doing damage. So in terms of how the Vikings can handle that sort of thing, it's improving. I think that despite Eric Hendricks's, accolades, he still has a lot of coverage issues to work out, which is unusual, of course, because that was his thing coming out of college. It's not like he's been bad at coverage. It's not like he's completely blown things. I mean, there's one Eric Ebron pass I think everyone kind of remembers. But other than that, when he's lost in coverage, he's lost sort of in contested situations or when he's been relatively close. And earlier, before he was proclaimed a starter, he was actually doing pretty phenomenally in coverage, especially against running backs. So, he has to like clean some things up to make sure that he can deal with Matt Forte and a little bit Martellus Bennett. I think we're going to see Anthony Barr and Bennett a lot because of the size matchup. But I think that those are the three players that you're probably going to end up relying on. Obviously, Harrison Smith is going to do a lot of damage over the middle, either as a rover slash robber or as a single high free safety. Either way, I think that you're right that the middle of the field is something that you have to worry about. Roads and man coverage and those linebackers and a safety should probably be enough to do damage, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Vikings gashed a couple of times on defense. And those weapons. I mean, Cutler is variably good, but those weapons are good enough that I think it's really unlikely the Vikings will be able to put together a shutout or anything like that. And so I wouldn't be surprised if the Vikings needed to rely on their offense a lot in this game, despite how good the defense has been playing the past couple of weeks.
Which Jay Cutler are we going to see on Sunday? Is it going to be good Jay Cutler? Is it going to be allergic to completions Jay Cutler? Is it going to be smoking Jay Cutler?
Yeah, I think with our luck, we're gonna see good Cutler. We're gonna see give a shit Cutler, which is problematic and has been problematic. But I don't know. I haven't seen a lot of Vikings Bears matchups where Cutler's been god awful. So I'm not looking forward to that. I think that Cutler has been variably good this season. He had a pretty good game against the Chiefs. But for the most part,
they still barely won.
Right. He's been mostly a bad quarterback this year. I would not be surprised to see, shockingly good Cutler show up for stretches at a time.
So how much do you think the ability of our defense to penetrate Chicago's functionally non-existent offensive line will impact Jay Cutler or good Jay Cutler? Do you think we could turn Freako good Jay Cutler into indifferent or smoking Jay Cutler, or perhaps even X-rays on the sideline Jay Cutler, like we did Matt Stafford last week?
And a few weeks prior as well. I think it's kind of interesting because Chicago's offensive line was good last year after being bad for so many years, and it's back to being bad, which is it's so interesting, and it must be frustrating for someone who has to play behind that line that isn't Jay Cutler. He, of course, is used to it. But I don't know. It's I expect a lot of pressure, but at some point, sometimes good Jay Cutler, exceeds the pressure around him. I think that for most quarterbacks, like Matt Stafford, putting pressure on that quarterback is a surefire way to make them perform worse. And of course, on average, Jay Cutler does worse under pressure than when there's no pressure. I mean, it's good to put pressure on him. I'm just saying that the likelihood of him sort of overcoming that pressure and putting in a good performance is still possible, whereas for some quarterbacks, that's sort of a remote possibility, and that, you give them a muddy pocket, they can't do much. Jay Cutler is, both folded under pressure at times and has been spectacular under pressure at other times. I think that you do have to make sure that you get pressure on him because, it's a football game. That's, of course, what you have to do. You also have to be careful in a way that you didn't need to be in that Lions game, because I think that the Lions running game has been stalled for some time, even though I respect, Amir Abdullah. I think he's a really good back. But Matt Forte, he's been producing a lot of yards, and I think that you have to be careful about him too. So when you put pressure on him, you need to stay disciplined within your lanes. And, of course, a little bit that means, Linval Joseph not rushing the passer through double teams and just sort of, staying home. But, some of that has to do with making sure the linebackers are playing gaps, even when the defensive ends and defensive tackle are rushing. And some of that has to do with, the defensive ends making sure that they can stay at home while still, putting pressure on the passers. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult, even though the offensive line's not as good. Just because I think the focus is going to be a little bit different for this defense than it was, last week, 2 weeks ago. So, yeah, I think that pressure is a good thing, and I think that pressure is going to be a good way to put Jay Cutler into enough of a bind where he might start throwing interceptions. But it's not as sure a thing as it is against a lot of quarterbacks.
That's fair. I imagine we see both good and bad Jay Cutler. Hopefully, we get bad Jay Cutler at the end. The last thing we need is to lose this game by 2 points.
That's true. That reminds me of a couple of games. Thanks, man.
Yeah, no problem. Hey, I was thinking of them too. So just coming out in the last 5 or 6 minutes as I look on Twitter here, Mike Zimmer says Adrian Peterson was a full go in practice. will be ready to go on Sunday. Will he chew his way to victory, or will he be tiny as a shrimp? To put it, I did not write that. James wrote that joke. He actually went back and edited our show notes just to include that joke. But
That's great,
seriously,
James.
so yeah, thanks. Adrian Peterson, will we see 35 carries for 70 yards or 36 carries for 135 yards? Because no, but seriously, that's been his like season so far, right? Like a lot of just below average run after below average run, maybe a negative run thrown in there, and then one classic Adrian Peterson breakout downfield performance.
Yeah, well, he leads the league in percent of runs that go for negative yards, and it'd be kind of foolish to say some of that's not his fault because it definitely is. I mean, he's been behind, running lines that have been worse than this, and he's been able to produce a little bit more consistently. But obviously, the offensive line is at issue as well. I think that in this case against a Chicago defense, he's much more likely to go off than he is to be bottled up the entire game. I wouldn't be surprised to see 3 runs of 10 yards or more with at least 1 run of 20 yards or more. Just because this defense is not intimidating in the slightest, and I think that despite a lot of the issues that we've had, sort of both with like the center Joe Berger and with right tackle T.J. Clemmings in terms of run blocking, despite that, I think that there's definitely a possibility that Adrian Peterson can rip one off, and he's aware of the problem too. There's a couple of videos posted at Vikings.com about how he's talked about, how he can sort of get rid of negative yardage and how he feels like he's stopping his feet a little bit too much and stuff like that. So, I expect Adrian to improve a little bit, but I've been saying that sort of all season, and in some senses he hasn't. So we'll see.
I see what you mean about the defense. I was trying to look up outstanding defensive players or players having outstanding seasons on defense for Chicago, and the best I could do was rookie defensive tackle Eddie Goldman, who leads all NFL rookie tackles with significantly higher Pro Football Focus pass rush productivity rating. No other rookie is above 6, and Eddie Goldman is 8.2, which gives him an edge over other rookies, I guess. But I mean, if that's a rookie who is somewhat better at pass rushing than other rookies is nothing really to hang your hat on.
Yeah, and it's a reason that Chicago is, I think they're ranked 30th or 29th in DVOA in team defense, and they're ranked either 30th or 29th in defending the run in particular. So it's, as a unit, it's not great, and I think that Eddie Goldman's probably being held back probably by the rest of the defense around him. I think that he'd be a little bit. It'd be a little bit easier for him to rush the passer if he had a little bit more talent around him. So even a rookie who's performing kind of well for a rookie is being held back. And I think that even if you rush at Eddie Goldman, you'll probably be fine.
So speaking of DVOA, on Football Outsiders, the Vikings are ranked surprisingly low. Well, maybe not surprisingly, but they're ranked very low, 28th.
Yeah, well, the reason for that is because of the strength of schedule. The Vikings have had the weakest defensive strength of schedule in the NFL. They're ranked 32nd in strength of schedule. If you take a look at the non-adjusted VOA, as it is, get rid of the D, then they rank in the top 8, actually. So that's the reason. It's it's a defense that on the field is producing maybe a top 8 performance from their metric perspective, but then when you adjust it for who they've been playing, not as much, which is why they're ranked so low.
Well, and it's funny because Teddy Bridgewater is ranked 9th in total QBR, like the ESPN quarterback measuring metric, but 25th in passing DVOA. And it seems like Football Outsiders, along with most Vikings fans, are, like, as the season goes on, scratching their heads more and more, wondering how we managed to lose to San Francisco.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's part of it is you have to give San Francisco credit. They played that game really well.
That game and only that game.
And only that game. But it's not just like the Vikings sucked, which is accurate. They did suck. But also, it also so happened that San Francisco played well above their means And while those two things are related, they're not like, they can be independent of each other too. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. We all saw the game. I think that the people who played the game were not entirely sure. But some of it has to do with you play a late game on the West Coast, and because it started at like 10 local, I think, right? That might have something to do with it. Yeah, it's kind of a lot of things. Just
But I mean, we didn't really like. I mean, Chicago certainly didn't beat Kansas City very hard, and Kansas City is not good. The Vikings managed to beat them in Week 6 despite gaining just 4.7 yards per play with a 33% success rate. I imagine Adrian Peterson was mostly responsible for bringing that play success rate, and particularly the run success rate, down.
Yeah, no, he's run success rate for the season, depending on the metric. I think Football Outsiders is a little bit higher than like if you use like expected points added or something like that. But his success rate has been, depending on your metric, around 25%, which is not just pretty low for a running back, but just pretty low. It's quite low.
So, how long do you think our fumble luck can last? We, according to an article on Football Outsiders, in which you will find in the show notes, then the Vikings have recovered 5 of 8 fumbles on offense, and all 4 of the fumbles they've caused on defense. That can't be sustainable, right?
Well, it's certainly not sustainable. I think that you can never rely on like fumbles being a sustainable form of turnover if you're recovering all of them. I mean, you need to basically from here on out, if the Vikings want to keep on producing in terms of their fumble recovery ability, they need to produce twice as many fumbles and hope to recover half of them. So yeah, I think that that's not sustainable, and it is part of the reason the defense is doing well. But it really doesn't feel like the defense is living off of fumbles and interceptions so much as it is just stopping them on third down. So it's not a problem to me that the defense is kind of overperforming relative to things that account for things like fumble luck. But certainly, it's something to watch out for going forward.
Along with the question that I started to ask in the last episode, why did the Vikings get going so slowly? Why are the Vikings so much better on third down than they are on first? It's weird, like both on offense and defense. It seems like we convert on offense and we stop on defense pretty consistently.
Yeah, I think part of it is that for a lot of third downs, teams have to move off script, and because who knows how many scripted plays a team has, but when they're on third and long, they probably aren't running one of their scripted plays, and so their tendencies are easier to take advantage of and notice. And then the second thing is, even without that, you kind of have a feel for what they're going to do, just in general. Because on third and long, teams are almost always going to pass the ball, or if they're Kansas City, want a wide receiver screen. So that's probably part of it. I think that for a team that's as young as the Vikings, I mean, they're very smart and they're very athletic. But for a team that's as young as the Vikings, it's just kind of easier to rely on your instincts in a situation where the range of options is narrowed. Now, for the Vikings, I think part of it on offense is that they run the ball too much on first and second down, which is why they kind of suck at it. Because Adrian Peterson's not doing a very good job on first and second down. And so
we run the ball for negative yards on every first down.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it seemed like in the last game. And so when you get away from that, the offense can actually do some pretty cool stuff. So that's part of it, and then also the other part of it is I think, and this is only kind of a recent development. We worried about this in the preseason, and I remember bringing this up sort of early on in the season 2, is that Teddy wasn't throwing past the sticks on third down. It was something that was like really frustrating for somebody who was otherwise performing well, and he's doing that now, and he's doing a very good job of finding open receivers on third down. And I think part of it is that having a defined goal beyond the sticks forces the Vikings to be a little bit more aggressive. And I think that, for a while the Vikings have been criticized offensively for not being aggressive enough, and I think that this has been an example of how those criticisms may ring true. Is that when they're more aggressive, i.e. when they're forced to be sort of on third down, they can execute. They're just not very aggressive on first and second down, and that's part of the reason.
Which is a weird thing to hear when you think of, historically Adrian Peterson.
Yeah, no, it is super weird, and it would be it would be nice to have him back. But he still does the explosiveness stuff. He still does the feast form of the feast and famine stuff. It's just his famines are so much worse than we're used to. So it's getting frustrating to watch, especially when we see Matt Asiata and Jerick McKinnon put together better success rates when they're in the game.
So I guess it would be time for a score prediction. Checking on Boveda last night and today, the money line bet and the total bets are gone, but the spread remains the same. Vikings -1.
Really?
Yeah. That's a curiosity. Although you get a little bit better price betting on the Bears at +1, -105 compared to -115.
That's kind of surprising. I would expect the Vikings to be at least 3-point favorites, even though they're away. Yeah, I guess I don't know about the implied point total, but I picked the Vikings to win by less than a touchdown. I think it was 23-17 was my prediction, because I do think the Bears are going to score just because of the weapons that they have, and that the Vikings are going to be forced to keep up. Maybe a missed extra point from Leonard Walsh, who knows? So yeah, 23-17.
I agree with your analysis. I think the game will be closer and a bigger nail biter for the Vikings than that. My prediction is a Vikings win with a final score of 24-21. And a harrowing final drive from Chicago that ends in failure. In fact, you know what? Let's go full on bad Jay Cutler and say that the final drive where the Bears could steal the game away ends in a pick.
Full Jay Cutler. That's a pretty
peak Jay Cutler.
It's a pretty bold prediction, Dusty.
This is Jay Cutler we're talking about here.
It's a pretty specific play you're asking for a pick on. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, but the last play, and you could argue that would be the most likely play to end in a pick if the Bears have to chew up a bunch of field with basically no time left, which I think has a pretty decent chance of
Any
happening.
pick that occurs of the Chicago offense in the last 2 minutes will be the last play, so that helps, is that it defines an endpoint too.
Well, and I was almost right about my crazy prediction against the Lions last week. So I'm gonna.
What was your crazy prediction?
Oh, that one touchdown play for either team, I didn't know which team, would be called back due to the fluid catch rule.
I mean, that's pretty close to right. Yeah, well, I would count it.
It was I was watching the game. I was like, oh my god, it's going to happen right now. So, Skol Vikings. Maybe I was gonna make a selfish shellfish joke, but I can't. I'm too tired.
You kind of sort of already did, so thanks.
You're welcome, world. Please contribute to Norse Code at norsecodepodcast.com. Save us all from terrible puns. Onward to my new favorite thing, daily fantasy sports. In particular, daily fantasy NFL football. I've put together a 6-week cash streak in the overlay-laden Yahoo $10 guaranteed prize pool tournament. And I think Yahoo is finally like wising up that their games are just like way softer than FanDuel or DraftKings. So they've reduced some of the overlay and changed some of the pricing structures. And like now quarterbacks are just generally much more expensive than they have been the last few weeks. Todd Gurley is no longer an amazing bargain. Stuff like that. But just playing on soft sites against bad players is not the only way to earn a few extra bucks playing daily fantasy football. And I do mean earn and not win. I will say that despite your success reading a couple of websites and then executing on their advice to win money at NBA DFS, the NFL side is a little bit more, saturated.
It's more competitive, I would say that, yeah.
Well, and now that you can watch one football game and see, FanDuel and DraftKings ads that have multiple promo codes, some of which are for bonuses and some of which are for free tournament entries, like you really get the feeling that most people who want to play are already playing. And a lot of these people are, professional writers. believe it or not, there are people who have been, doing DFS for multiple years already and writing about it. And chances are they're making more money playing than they are writing. I don't know if you know this, Arif, but writing, it turns out, is not very lucrative.
Oh, is that the case? Is that, huh? It's almost as if I've been spending more time making money playing DFS than I have been writing.
Oh, are you a case study in the thing I just said? Wow, phenomenal. So this is all to say though that writers, when they write, may not have your best interests at heart. Not that they're necessarily trying to fade you. Like, not every writer is like, oh yeah, just take Brady and Gronk every week. You'll win all the money, and then they're out there picking Ryan Tannehill when he throws 4 touchdowns in a game. I made me so angry. I threw my hat on the floor. I was just like, really? The Dolphins? Ugh. But yeah, so you can't always. I mean, it's nice to be able to go out and see what the conventional wisdom is, but you can't always take it to heart because at the end of the day, you're competing against those same writers in the same games. So we've talked a little.
It's an interesting contradiction that you have to deal with. Luckily, no writer is in such a position where they can move lines, as it were, with what they publish. So there's at least a limited form of disincentive to screw you.
Well, and there's only so much impact you can have if you're just issuing picks on a weekly basis, because you can't really issue the picks until the prices have been set. I mean, you can talk about trends or whatever, but once the prices are out there, then it kind of handicaps everyone. You can't influence a player's price by dissuading your readers from picking him or emphasizing a particular player's value.
Right. Yeah.
And we've talked a little bit about the difference between cash games, like games where you just double your money or quadruple your money, and guaranteed prize pool tournaments, and how cash games tend to reward consistent teams with players that have high point floors, and guaranteed prize pool tournaments are they more likely to reward, we'll say, crazy, insane risks.
Like calculated out there risks. Come on.
So, well, that leads to my next question then. How do you calculate those risks?
Well,
Now,
yeah, so, well, you were about to say something.
The simplest place to start for me was, well, what is my total salary and how many points do I need roughly in order to finish, either in the money or in a cash game or near the top of a guaranteed prize pool tournament. And you can just do the math yourself by looking at previous weeks. If you wanted to find a mean or an average, you could do that, and dividing your available salary by the average points required to finish in the desired spot in the money. And that can give you kind of like a rough idea of about how many points per dollar your players should be scoring. And fantasy points per game is, I mean, it's useful, but it's super misleading. Because if Homeboy misses week 1 and week 2 and then scores 27 points in week 3, then his average is only going to be 9, even though in the one game he played, he was like a marquee player.
Yeah, no, and you have to watch out for players who are injured in the middle of games. So, like, even if you get rid of games they didn't play in, Ben Roethlisberger's average, I mean, I think he's only played 3 games so far. His average is somewhere around 16 because he put together a 6-point game that he got injured in. But his true average, as it were, is probably closer to 21. And so that's something you have to watch out for, too. It's also something that a lot of players you'll be playing against will not be watching out for. So it allows you to get sort of an advantage by being able to select someone who is low priced and low owned.
Yeah, and so it naturally follows that with Roethlisberger not playing and not being picked by DFS owners, and also having such a low average fantasy points per game, his price will be lower than it probably should be. There'll be a fairly large inefficiency in the way that he is priced, at least for his first game or two coming back. Right? That's kind of what we're getting at.
Yeah, and he actually, when I was looking at DraftKings, he's priced a little lower than I expected, but actually it's a surprisingly competitive salary. I think on FanDuel and some other sites he's not priced well, and so he's someone that you can take advantage of because it sounds like he's definitely playing.
So looking at the week 6, it started out as the $1 million baller with $1 million guaranteed, $10 entry guaranteed prize pool tournament on Yahoo. Every week the guarantee has gone down. I think we're down to $600,000 now because they realized they were just throwing away money on overlay. But in week 6, the winner had one player, I forget who was owned by over 50% of uh, DFS owners. So over half the people in the tournament had this player. It was one of the running backs. I think
Todd
it was
Gurley?
Devontae.
Oh, okay. It was either Todd Gurley or Devonta Freeman.
I'm almost certain it was Devontae. And 7 players on his team were 9% or less owned. 7 players out of 9 on his team had single digit ownership numbers. So they were a lot of diamonds in the rough, you could say.
Right.
How so there's an article on RotoCurve that we'll throw in the show notes, and in that article, low ownership by itself is not a reason to roster someone, but if 2 guys are equal or close to it, and one of the two has a much lower ownership percentage, a good game from him will do more to help move you up the rankings. Agree or disagree?
I kind of agree. I've always been a little, I guess, bearish, if you will, on the value of ownership percentage. There's a really good article also at Roto Grinders that applies, a lesson in game theory, and it's just an example that demonstrates the point, and it makes sense intuitively, especially when you're in the middle of a sweat, when you're like when you're like trying to get like fourth place, you're trying to stay in the money, and so you're taking a look at the person who is most likely to compete against you, and you realize that hey, this person has 3 of my players, so it's kind of irrelevant. But the fourth player, I have, and he doesn't, or he has and I don't. So I've got to watch out for that. And so it makes a lot of sense intuitively. And when you're in that moment, that ownership percentage matters a lot. And from a game theory perspective, of course, it makes a lot of sense. A lot of people who played, Julio Jones last week, did really well because, in order to do that, they faded DeAndre Hopkins, who was owned by like 40-50% of people. It was enormous. And Julio Jones was not well owned because he had 2 consecutive weeks of poor play. So people who played him did a lot better because they did not play DeAndre Hopkins. And if I had played Julio Jones, I probably would have won, a couple thousand more dollars instead of DeAndre Hopkins in one of my lineups. So it makes sense when you take a look at it from that perspective, and from the perspective of the fact that you don't know sort of what the optimal lineup is going in, right? It's all gambles and well, maybe not gambles. It's all chances, right? And you have to understand sort of what is the likelihood that this player is going to produce as many points as I need them to produce and stuff like that. And if the likelihood of that player producing the points that you need uh, is lower than the likelihood of it's complicated to put it like this, but if enough people have that player, then that likelihood is going to be too low, even though that likelihood by itself is absolutely pretty high. That likelihood is going to be too low not to pivot to someone else. So that's the idea. But I still am kind of bearish on the idea because, especially in football, like if you're playing other kinds of DFS, it's a little bit different. But especially in football, the likelihood of you not having a unique lineup is really low. Like even if you're playing a bunch of obvious plays, it's really low because the highest likelihood ownership percentage is usually around 40%, and you've got 9 players, and some of them are not going to be owned 40%. Some of them are going to be owned 10% or 15%, and you multiply those percentages across, and that's not exactly a pristine way to do it because players will play stacks, right? So if you're playing Andy Dalton, you're slightly more likely to play Tyler Eifert or AJ Green, for example, but still you multiply those percentages out, even in enormous lineups like in the Millionaire Maker, uh, the the chances of you having the same lineup as someone else is really low. And when you go through like the winners and stuff like that, you'll see occasionally that there are a bunch of lineups that are identical. And so it sounds like that's really not the case. It sounds like there are more identical lineups, but the likelihood of you having the same identical lineup as 100,000 other people is pretty low. But the likelihood of a random pair of 100,000 people having, or not a random pair, but any pair of 100,000 people having an identical lineup are pretty high. So don't get tricked by stuff like that. I would say that I would say that ownership percentage is useful because it informs your ability on individual players like Julio Jones and DeAndre Hopkins. But I think that overall, people put a little bit too much emphasis on it because you're going to have a unique lineup at the end of the day.
I think you will have a unique lineup unless you do not have one by design. I think percent ownership numbers are influenced by to some degree. I mean, I haven't done the math because that would take a very long time. But I feel like a lot of the pro type players that run the same lineup multiple times in a tournament to kind of increase their exposure, turn a small stakes game into a mid stakes or a higher stakes game, kind of push those numbers a certain way. Players that play stacks, like you said, can push ownership numbers a certain way, and I think that DFS right now is still fairly since it's not very well regulated and there's not you don't know a whole lot about who you're playing against. I think it's entirely possible that you were playing against human teams of people who purposefully pick very similar lineups, or people who are of like mind, the same group of guys that work at the same job that talk about football all week, and then all, whether intentionally or not, pick a very similar lineup for that week's DFS contest.
Yeah. I think that you're probably going to have unique lineups unless you're right, unless by design you do not. Which in some cases that's not terrible. I think that people who played a Brady Gronk stack were probably pretty happy. Sometimes people are well owned because they're good plays, and you don't want to get away from that. But sometimes the buddies around your office, if you all play the same lineup, you're just splitting the pot. So you got to find a way to zag while they zig.
It's true, and avoid the temptation to play the same lineup in cash games, guaranteed prize pool tournaments. I know I battle that every week. I think, oh yeah, maybe I should. I really like this lineup. Maybe I should enter it in a different style of game, and just completely ignoring that I designed the lineup very intentionally one way. And it's funny, I've never lost money, although it's getting more and more difficult with salaries and the continued stellar performance of the Patriots. But I have never lost money in a cash game with a Brady, Edelman, Gronk stack. And I mean, at that point, you're basically like filling the rest of your team with like sawdust and wood glue. But it doesn't matter because you got Tom Brady, Julian Edelman, and Rob Gronkowski, who between the three of them will combine for at least 17 touchdowns.
In a game.
In every game.
In every game. Yeah. I think you can take a look at those articles, absorb them. You can disagree with them. You can agree with them. You can disagree with me. You can agree with me. But they're definitely worth reading because they tell you a lot about the way that high level DFS players are playing. And they're probably, reading them, even if you disagree with them, reading them will probably help your bottom line. I think that there's a really good likelihood of that. You can get this week's ownership percentage over at dfsreport.com, also at rotoworld.com. They both publish FanDuel's Thursday slate ownership lineup. So it's not like they have inside information. It's like that stuff becomes public every week on Thursday, and all you have to do is get rid of the players who played on Thursday to get an understanding of who is likely to be played in the Millionaire Maker and in other contests on Sunday. The ownership percentages are slightly different because FanDuel and DraftKings have different scoring, and because you don't get access to the Thursday games, which notably had Tom Brady, a pretty high-owned player. But they're really good for determining who's high owned and who's low owned.
For whatever that's worth. And right. I think it's important to talk more about how to think about daily fantasy sports than to stay focused on picks. I have a very good friend who is a very smart person, not much of a gambler, not much of a sports bettor, a casual sports fan, but a very smart person. Likes to play with spreadsheets and numbers, things like that. And he's been using me as I don't know why he's doing this, but he's been using me as a resource for information about DFS. And one thing that I've kind of run into talking to him a lot is that he just lacks a foundation in how to think about this stuff and how to talk about this stuff. And he calls me like breathless with these like really interesting ideas, and I think to myself, well, yeah, that is functionally self-evident. I imagine it's a lot the way you feel when I'm like talking to you on the show.
Well, no, but close.
but I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like he has a lot of good ideas, and he's spending a lot of his own brain power coming up with them. Whereas if he just took a weekend to read some stuff on RotoCurve or RotoGrinders or DFS Report, then he could get himself caught up to speed and start thinking about more interesting things and more detailed ways to set his lineups, rather than engaging all of his considerable brain power learning the fundamentals by himself.
Yeah, I think I think that this is a mistake that a lot of smart people do in a lot of activities. And I understand like why this mistake is made, but the reason is functionally, that you don't want to be, polluted by the thinking of others when you come up with what you think are pretty unique ideas and stuff like that. But the issue is that there are, in fact, other smart people, and those other smart people have spent time doing this, and so they've already done all of the work that you're spending time doing that you don't need to do. They've already, gone through sort of the game theoretical aspects of some theory that you have, or they've already played through sort of the approach that you have, and they've come up with conclusions, and even better, they've published those conclusions, and so you can read them, and it lets you skip a lot of work when it comes to coming up with a lot of your own theories as to how to like construct a lineup or how daily fantasy should work and stuff like that.
And if there's anything I love, it's skipping work. Wait.
I know that to be true, Dusty.
maybe not the way I meant it, but yeah. So now, having said all that, let's get to the part that people have been waiting for: our picks for Week 8. now that we have told you how worthless it is to just listen to someone else tell you who to play, who should people play?
Well, I have Phillip Rivers in a lot of my lineups. We were talking about this before the show. In fact, I have him in so many lineups that I actually am going to be spending the weekend. I'm going to spend all 48 hours. No, I'm going to spend some time over the weekend getting rid of him in some lineups just because it's such a high exposure. But he's such a good play that it's very difficult not to play him, especially on DraftKings where his price is still criminally low. He's had, I think, over 50 attempts in the past 2 games. That's going to go down, so I don't expect that. But they can't rely on the running game. Their defense is bad, so they're in a lot of shootouts. And he's averaging at least 40 attempts a game. In fact, he's only had 1 game this year where he's had fewer than 40 attempts, and he's not a pick machine. And so when you have somebody who doesn't throw like 5% of their passes as picks and throws over 40 attempts a game, they're obviously going to be a pretty good, player in terms of fantasy. When they're priced at about $6,600 in DraftKings, I think, like somewhere around $8,500 in FanDuel, they're a really, really, really good play. So Phillip Rivers is probably my top play, I think, from the quarterback perspective. Do you have anybody from aside from him as a quarterback that you find yourself playing a lot?
Well, I am actually going to piggyback off what you're saying and say that this is a particularly good week to get a cheap, potentially high-scoring San Diego stack. With Keenan Allen being a game-time decision and Antonio Gates being out, I think Stevie Richardson and Ladarius Green will see a lot more touches, and they are both very cheap compared to marquee receivers on Yahoo, and I haven't looked at the prices on FanDuel or DraftKings, but it would definitely be worth checking out a quarterback, wide receiver, tight end stack with those 3 players, because that would probably leave you enough money to stack yourself with running backs and a good flex.
Yeah, no, for sure. In fact, I'm actually playing Ladarius Green in my flex spot. for a lot of these lineups, not just because stacking is good, but also because or stacking is good when you want volatility, so like in GPPs. But also, he's priced on DraftKings at $3,000, which is the minimum for a running back or wide receiver. He's going to produce more than anybody who's producing at the minimum, or anybody who costs the minimum at running back or wide receiver. And so so he costs $3,000, which is technically more than the minimum for a tight end. But if you think about him like a wide receiver, he's a steal. And so I've been able to spend up to get, in some stacks, Le'Veon Bell and Devonta Freeman. In some stacks, I get, Julio Jones and DeAndre Hopkins, and then I spend down to get Stevie Johnson. So yeah, no, there's there's a lot of opportunity there when you stack a low cost San Diego offense for sure. Other than San Diego, I think at the running back position, there's a couple of values, but it's not nearly as good this week as it had been the last 2 weeks. I mean, you take a look, Todd Gurley the last 2 weeks, he's been getting tons and tons and tons of play because he was so cheap. And now places like Yahoo, like you mentioned, but also just in general.
Now he's like more expensive than Adrian Peterson.
Right. They're wising up to the fact that, well, actually that makes sense. So they're wising up to that. Yeah, I think you could get a player like Justin Forsett. I think he's only 6,100, but he's producing pretty much near the level of some of those high-owned, high-salary running backs for like $2,000 cheaper. So he's a running back that I would target. Again, not the same kind of deal as people were getting with Todd Gurley just a week ago, but definitely I think a pretty good value at 6,100. I think Doug Martin is still a fantastic value. I mean, he's been producing a lot. He's got a really high ceiling, and he's great in GPPs. And he's only 5,500, so he's a pretty simple pick as well. So those are the running backs that I'm looking at. And
I'm definitely running Doug Martin. I also think actually my smart friend whose method values consistency, maybe a little more than it should, but that's a story for another day. He is really high on Giovanni Bernard.
It's interesting because he, to me, seems like a GPP play because Bernard either gets touches or he doesn't. When he does get touches, he gets a lot. I think your smart friend might also be enticed by the fact that it only costs 4,800. I don't mind Bernard. I just don't know that if he's a player I'd pick for his consistency so much as I would for his upside.
Well, as long as he's got upside, that's really all that matters to me. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. I just want $40,000.
Yeah, that's fair, I guess.
let's just be honest about our motivation here. Doug Martin, Giovanni Bernard. Who else?
Well, we talked a little bit about Justin Forsett. I would also look at Darren McFadden, who,
really?
Christine Michael is not getting any carries. Randall, got injured a little bit in the game, and then he's like facing a suspension. Who knows? But the point is, McFadden is now the lead back in Dallas, and he actually looks pretty good. He only costs $3,800, so you're not making a huge gamble by playing him because of how cheap he is. If he tends to dud a little bit, you're basically paying just above minimum for him, and so the people that you buy saving money on him will probably make up for it. I wouldn't put him in a ton of games. He's already in too many of my games as it is, but as an exposure player, that really mid-level exposure, maybe 25 to 30% of your games, I think that he's a great play because I think he's the lead back in Dallas right now, and he only costs $3,800 on DraftKings. He's got a pretty similar price, I think closer to $4,500 in FanDuel, and in Yahoo, my guess is that he's pretty cheap.
I know you said that San Diego can't really run the ball, but I still think that Danny Woodhead is undervalued in salary terms. I think, at least on Yahoo, he is less than half the price of the top running backs, and definitely performs at a rate that is commensurate with being priced higher than that. I don't think he's elite level. He's no Devonta Freeman, but I mean he's definitely worth more than the $20 in salary that you have to spend on him.
Well, the good thing about Danny Woodhead is that the running game can do poorly and he can do well because he's a receiving back. And in fact, he does better as a receiver than he does as a runner, which is why I like Danny Woodhead in DraftKings a lot. I don't like him in FanDuel a lot because of the PPR bonus that you get in DraftKings. I don't really know Yahoo's scoring system. My guess is if you're having a lot of success with Danny Woodhead, that they're a full point PPR.
Yes.
Yeah, then yeah, no, then he's a great play because he gets so many receptions.
Who do you like more at tight end, Gary Barnidge or Tyler Eifert?
It's weird. So I mean, I think that question in general, I don't think anyone is surprised, is kind of weird. Um,
Well, no, because if you look at their fantasy production just in pure averages, they look pretty similar, and their salaries, at least on Yahoo, are pretty similar. I mean, you can Barnage is a slightly cheaper option if you're really trying to spend up just a little bit on someone. You could take Barnage over Eifert, but
well, so Cincinnati's tight end game and Tyler Eifert in particular have been they've been very responsive to how well their opponents play them. And so if Tyler's up against a good defense against tight ends, he tends to do poorly. But if he's up against a bad defense against tight ends, he tends to do well, more so than almost any other tight end. And obviously to the point where he's the number 1 or 2 scoring tight end for a while before Gronkowski retook the throne. And this week up against Pittsburgh, they're up against a relatively weak defense against tight ends. I think they rank 20th in DVOA against tight ends. And so I would play, Eifert this week. But, in weeks where he's up against pretty good defenses against tight ends, I think the Bills were one of them. If not, I think, the Ravens were one of them. Either way, against good defenses against tight ends, that's when I'd probably pivot to Barnage. Barnage is just a really difficult sell, even though he's playing really well. And it's easy for me to play him now, but it took me a while to be like, well, I guess this isn't fluky. But he's relatively consistent, and so he's the guy I'd pivot to if Eifert has a bad matchup.
is there any reason other than a bye week why you would not pick the Denver defense?
I mean, they're expensive.
But defenses are. I mean, I guess if you have a compelling reason to try and spend up a little bit somewhere else, but it seems like at least on Yahoo asterisk, defensive prices are one lower compared to most other positions, and two pretty tightly clustered together. Like the really bad defenses will be $10, but then the best defense, which is prohibitively the best, is only $17. And so for less than double your money, you can purchase triple the points.
No, and that's a good point. And I've been rolling with a combination of the Rams, Panthers, and Denver defenses in DraftKings this week. It's kind of weird because of the matchup. Denver's playing up against Green Bay, so they've got a really bad matchup. So they're pretty cheap. They're 2,900, but points scored is only one aspect of it. I wouldn't be surprised, especially because I think the Packers are playing in Denver, if I remember correctly.
You are correct.
I wouldn't be surprised if Aaron Rodgers threw a pick. I wouldn't be surprised if Denver forced a fumble and recovered it, and I wouldn't be surprised to see a sack or two. And so because Denver's only $2,900, when the max price for defenses is $4,000 on DraftKings, I'd be willing to play Denver a little bit just because you get points from sacks and turnovers. I'm playing a lot of St. Louis Rams this week. They're
going to crush San Francisco. Kaepernick is in bad trouble, 5 picks trouble.
Yeah, and they're in fact slightly more expensive than the Broncos, but they're a safer play because, like you said, they're up against Kaepernick. They're probably going to get a ton of sacks. He's probably not going to be the same as the Cleveland defense showing that, I recommended playing St. Louis against Cleveland. That worked out really well. It's probably not going to be as well an opportunity or as good of an opportunity as that game was, but it's still a really good opportunity. A lot of possibilities for turnovers, a lot of possibilities for sacks. And I bet the Rams cost more than the Broncos do in Yahoo as well. And that's something I might be willing to spend up for in a lot of my lineups.
They don't. The Broncos have been the most expensive defense on Yahoo for the entire season. The Broncos are at $17, which is maybe 40% of maximum player price. Mm-hmm. And the Rams are only 15. And so again, it's clustered, but you can save a couple bucks and potentially get a much more exploitable matchup by going with St. Louis. And my lineups are about evenly split between St. Louis and Denver.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's the play at defense. Those are three most obvious plays to me: Panthers, Rams, and Broncos. But Broncos is a risky play because of who they're up against. Certainly a good enough defense that's going to get you points and probably not going to hurt you. Which a lot of people people pay up just to get not hurt by defenses, and I can see why, because sometimes they're pretty difficult to predict. Other than that, at wide receiver, you could take a look at Stephon Diggs. I think that's a
I
pretty
was just about to ask you about Stephon Diggs.
Yeah, well, he's underpriced, I think, in every format, and he's gotten like 6 receptions a game since he started. And he's only $4,800 in DraftKings. I wouldn't be surprised if he put up a ceiling of around, 25, 26 points. And that's kind of like a Larry Fitzgerald type ceiling. And so if you can get him for $4,800, I think that's a really good deal. He's probably, the easiest value play to identify out of all of them. But other than that, I think that, you could take a look at Mike Evans this week. Winston's throwing a lot to Evans. They've got a pretty good matchup. You could take a look at Nate Washington, who's actually been surprisingly consistent, even though no one's talked about him, as the opposite to DeAndre Hopkins. He's got a decent ceiling if they shut Hopkins down, which is unlikely, but still a pretty decent play. And then I don't mind, shots at like Ted Ginn, who has also been surprisingly consistent because there are no targets in Carolina.
I just want to reiterate my just like how high I am on big San Diego stack. I have one lineup that has Phillip Rivers, Malcolm Floyd, Stevie Johnson, and Ladarius Green. And the great thing is that I was able to get the combination of Floyd, Johnson, and Green for $4. Actually, no, for the same price as Phillip Rivers.
That's incredible.
Right?
Well, okay, yeah. So that's one way to get the same lineup as Dusty.
I guess we'll report back next week. I'll let you know. As much as I like this lineup, because I was able to get 3 players for the price of one, and also the benefit of a pretty strong stack and a pretty pass-heavy offense, it really let me spend up on my running backs. So I have, as long as San Diego does well, I'll do well. But I am a little nervous about, with a stack like this, I thought about just, deleting my lineup and going and betting on the San Diego game instead. You know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying, but maybe I think there are fewer sharps in DFS, so.
That's true. And there's like this way, San Diego can still have what looks like a good game. Like Phillip Rivers can still have a big game and they can still lose and I can still win.
Right.
Which is nice.
Exactly.
But beyond that, I have Kamar Aiken because I was trying to spend up someplace else.
Right.
He strikes me as extremely, good value just because he's really, really cheap and is worth, more than 2 points per dollar, which is kind of like my price floor. I try to avoid taking players unless I think they have a particularly like abusable matchup that are averaging less than 2 points per dollar on Yahoo.
Right.
Wow, we just went like I was only going to do like a pick or two, but we pretty much gave you a whole lineup.
Yeah, a lot to choose from based off of what we said, but definitely enough of a lineup based off of everything we said.
And when you min cash in every GPP, remember to send a few bucks Norse Code's way.
Right.
We'd really appreciate that. Take some of your $56 that you won. Yahoo has this ridiculous thing in your upcoming contests. It tells you how much money you have in play over how many tournament entries, and then it tells you your potential winnings.
DraftKings does that too. It's so evil.
I could potentially win $127,000 if every single one of my lineups won their tournament.
Yeah, no, I'm which they don't even do the thing where they calculate what happens if your lineups win first, second, third. No, they just calculate if your lineups win the maximum amount of money.
What if you just won everything, which is not possible, literally not possible.
Yeah, well, you've inspired me to check how many potential winnings I have in DraftKings right now because I entered a lot more in the Millionaire Maker this week than I have in most weeks. So I imagine my potential winnings are closer to $20 million. Let's see.
Well,
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm winning $20 million right now, guys.
that's totally gonna happen. This is your week, Arif. Oh man, Arshad will have to respect your sports knowledge then. $20 million.
Finally, my family will love me.
Exactly, the love and respect of someone you kind of like. No, that's not true. So yeah, that's your DFS today report. I suppose you've got a lineup. You've got some information on how to think better about DFS, and we will make this a moderately regular feature. I think we'll do this again next week. James is less enthusiastic about daily fantasy sports, so we'll wait until the days that he's off doing work stuff or dad stuff or whatever. But we can still get down on the not gamble.
Yeah.
One question in the mailbag from Racer K at Racercraft on Twitter. Who has the best chance to unseat Sendejo next year? Exum, Harris, Vereen, or an unnamed member of the 2016 safety draft class?
Man, that's tough. I would say Exum. I've been talking about how disappointing he hasn't been on the field and how that's like clearly an indication of something. So it's not as if I'm super high on him, but if the issue is that he is making mistakes and he doesn't know the scheme, and he has about one more year to prove that he can, and that he does know it, because sometimes it takes players a little bit longer, even though they're instinctive and good. So yeah, I would say it's Exum just because he's got so much natural talent that it'd be surprising if the Vikings didn't take a chance on him.
I lied. There was actually one more question in the mailbag, but I'm going to save that one for next week because we've already gone a little long, and this is a good question with a potentially long answer.
All right.
Wow, that's it. And we're doing great. We're only like an hour and 10 minutes. A new record.
Hooray!
Then let's get out of this while we're still alive. Do you have any parting shots before the outro?
Not.
No? Excellent. Well, continue writing or not writing, and posting or not posting the things that you have written. And we'll come back early next week to recap our win over Chicago, break that nasty streak. In the meantime, you can check out our website, norsecodepodcast.com. At the bottom of the page, you will find links to our Patreon page, where you can become an ongoing sponsor of the show, or just give us a one-time donation via PayPal, which, as I said, we really appreciate, especially if you make a little money with our DFS picks this week. That would be a very kind thing for you to do, is kick some back down to us. Check us out on Twitter at Norse Code DN. Our producer James manages the Norse Code Twitter account. He has a personal account at Big Mono. Arif, of course, is at Arif Hassan NFL, and I am at Dusty O'Connell on the Twitter. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/Daily Norseman, which is also the name of the blog that hosts this podcast, The Daily Norseman, at dailynorseman.com. And we are grateful to them for their support and being allowed to continue posting our awesome podcast on their website twice a week, every week, which is a thing we do now. So until early next week, after week 8 is in the books, our formula is this: keep Teddy alive. We'll see you then.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this: we go out, we hit people in the mouth.